Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. The Honorable Chancellors of the Chancery Courts of Davidson County, 20th Judicial District, State of Tennessee, finding it fit and proper to do so, meet in special session outside the courthouse at the request of the President and the Board of Directors of the Nashville Bar Association to entertain resolutions in memory of former members of the Nashville Bar Association recently deceased. All persons present are asked to draw nigh and give attention so the memorial resolutions to be presented may be heard. God save the Honorable Chancery Courts of Davidson County, this state of Tennessee, and these United States. The Honorable Ellen Hobbs Lyle, Chancellor Part 3, presiding.
Thank you, Clerk and Master Maria Salas, for convening this proceeding. Good morning. I am Chancellor Ellen Hobbs Lyle, and along with Chancellors Pat Moskell and Ann Martin, convene the 2020 Nashville Bar Association Memorial Service. Circumstances prevented Chancellor Russell Perkins from joining us at this time, but he, of course, joins in this ceremony as he does every year and wishes us all well and that we may proceed. This service is to recall and honor our colleagues who have passed away in this year. We welcome to the service family and friends of those being memorialized, along with attorneys of our community. This proceeding is long-standing and it's venerated. It is a special and important gathering to our legal community. It is a time when we leave the courtroom and law office to join with family and friends, to chronicle and reflect upon the lives of the attorneys recognized today, and to reflect upon the bonds we share in their lives and the practice of law in Nashville. The way these proceedings are conducted is that following this opening of court, the President of the Nashville Bar Association will address our gathering. Following that, Keith Turner of the Nashville Bar Association Historical Committee will call upon the attorneys to present the motions and the resolutions. Then the motions on the resolutions will be given to the court and to everyone convened for each person being memorialized today. Upon the conclusion of the presentation of the resolutions, the court will act upon the motions to conclude the proceeding. A testament to the significance of this proceeding is that this is the only time the chancellors sit en banc as one entity and preside together. The chancellors are honored to preside at this service. We recognize and thank the Nashville Bar Association Historical Committee for all of their diligence and the thoughtful hours they devote and volunteer to the making of the memorial resolutions. And we thank the Historical Commission and the Nashville Bar Association, especially in this year of the COVID-19 pandemic, for assuring this service continued, endured, and took place as it always has for all these years. At this time, then, our proceedings begin, and the court calls upon the President of the Nashville Bar Association, Laura Baker.
On behalf of the Nashville Bar Association, it is my privilege to welcome you to the Fall Memorial Service. Today, we will honor some truly remarkable members of the bar. Among them are veterans, community leaders, musicians, and authors. And perhaps most importantly, we honor parents, spouses, grandparents, and friends. These individuals embodied the ideals of service to the bar and service to the community, and we collectively are better for having known them, for having loved them, and for having practiced law alongside them. To the family members and friends of those we honor, I extend heartfelt condolences on behalf of the Nashville Bar Association. And to Keith Turner and the Nashville Bar Association Memorial Service Committee, you have our sincerest gratitude for your incredible efforts to honor those we remember here today.
The memorial resolution for Robert C. Goodrich Jr. will be presented by Stephen Price.
A tribute to and memorial for Bob Goodrich. Bob Goodrich was a passionate man. Bob made no secret about his love for his wife and kids. He also was effusive about his anti-death penalty and other causes. Bob was just as focused in a court of law as he was on a tennis court. Bob also was just as focused when he fought the fight of his life against leukemia before finally succumbing in March of this year. Bob, who graduated from Macaulay, UVA, and Vanderbilt, was a scholar, but never boastful. After spending most of his legal career as a renowned bankruptcy attorney in private practice, Bob last worked while in remission for the Legal Aid Society. But Bob's first job was as a teacher, a role he never left behind. His desire to teach younger lawyers was one of his greatest gifts, for which many benefited. Here are a few tales about Bob showing just how big his heart truly was. As a young lawyer, I had frequent discussions with Bob about my work. In our first discussion, Bob asked if I had looked at a certain library book. I said I didn't know we had a firm library. Wrong answer. Bob then gave me a personal library tour and politely said I should spend more time there. A junior partner and Bob's former associate approached me later and said, "It gets better." After many more of these discussions, Bob summoned me for what should have been another cross-examination. But our discussion of my latest work was short and sweet. I proudly told our assistant afterwards to mark this down in history as the day I finally met Bob's standards. Looking at me with amusement, she said, "Bob has been very busy, so I doubt he even read it." Early on, I confided with Bob about a personal issue weighing heavily on me. Bob stopped everything, listened, and helped solve my problems. This completely changed my view of him. I was given the gift of a true mentor with Bob, who cared for my professional and personal development. I now realize our discussions were just to correct and guide me in the safety of Bob's office, rather than the less forgiving real world. I'm a much better lawyer in person for that. Bob took the same care for personal advice. Any young professional is lucky to have someone take a vested interest in mentoring them, but the lucky few have had someone like Bob who truly took an interest in all facets of their life. Years ago, Bob led a group on a bicycle ride to his Chattanooga childhood home. After a very long ride, 2 mountains appeared. Always in control, Bob picked the wrong mountain to ride up, leaving our hapless group the grim task of riding back down at dusk and then up the right mountain in the dark to his parents' home. This pattern never ended for Bob, who could not read a map to save his life. So if you want to know how good a lawyer Bob was, he was just as good at lawyering as he was hopelessly bad at navigating. As he said, "I'd like to go on vacation and leave myself at home." I always knew Bob professionally, but our friendship grew on the tennis court. I can say Bob was the partner you loved to have, but the opponent you feared. He was always well prepared, fiercely competitive, and relentless. We also shared a love for good writing. In his last years, Bob wrote the most lucid, truthful prose in his Afterlife blog, which was not a manual for dying well, which he certainly did, but for living well. Bob was not only ethical, but also moral. This word now has the connotation of being preachy, but Bob's morality consisted of deeply held convictions on truth-seeking and correcting injustice, particularly for the poor and those on death row. We all miss Bob every day.
The memorial resolution for Charles Horace Warfield Sr. will be presented by Ashley Wiltshire.
May it please the court, Charles Horace Warfield, who died in February at the age of 95, was a distinguished member of this bar. The memorial resolution, which has been filed with this court, details many of his contributions to the city, state, and to our nation. A special note was that he was twice on the board of this association and was president of the Nashville Bar in 1991. He was a vigorous advocate, but with that, he was also a model of civility. One opposing lawyer called him Sweet Charlie. Here's an example of how effective his engaging manner could be. For about 15 years in the 1970s and 80s, Warfield represented a group of plaintiffs in federal court in West Tennessee who were opposing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who wanted to channelize the Forked Deer River. At one point, preparing for one of the many hearings, Warfield took the deposition of the chief of the engineering section of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they struck it off very well and got along fine, and Warfield got a good bit of information that was very helpful to him. Months later, when the hearing came up, the lawyer for the Corps put on his chief engineer and did his direct and then sat down. When Warfield stood up to cross-examine the witness turned to the judge, Bailey Brown, and said, "I object to Mr. Warfield cross-examining me." Well, Judge Brown said, your objection is highly unusual, sir, and Mr. Warfield certainly has a right to cross-examine you, but just for curiosity, why do you say that? He said, because he was too nice to me in the deposition. And I said some things I didn't mean to tell him. Judge Brown said, well, Mr. Arnold, which is the chief engineer's name, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Warfield knows that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. Another case, it was the opposing lawyer who objected. Warfield's cross-examination of one of his witnesses was going very well, and after every answer, Warfield would say, "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir." He would say it. And this went on 4 or 5 times, and finally the other lawyer objected, and Bill Willis was sitting as special judge, and he looked at the objecting lawyer and said, "I don't think I can tell Mr. Warfield not to be polite." Warfield was always generous and polite. That was Warfield. Thank you, Alan.
The memorial resolution for Donald Wayne Jones will be presented by John Cooper.
May it please the court. Donald Don Jones passed away at home, surrounded by his beloved family on December 29th, 2019. Don was one of the most loved and most influential persons in Nashville government, and his contributions to the city will be felt for many years to come. Born on October 23rd, 1944 in Princeton, Kentucky, Don was the son of the late Harold Sam and Lillian Creekmer Jones. Once named by the Tennessean as the most powerful man in Metro, Don was a respected and well-loved legal advisor to the city of Nashville for almost 4 decades. Don graduated from Tulane Law School in 1970 before returning to his hometown of Princeton to practice law. Don and his family then moved to Nashville in 1977 when he took a job as an assistant metropolitan attorney with the Metropolitan Department of Law. Don was eventually appointed Metropolitan Director of Law by Mayor Richard Fulton. Don then left the government world to work in private practice during the 1980s for a while with Dearborn and Ewing, but returned to Metro after a few years when he was appointed as special counsel to the Metropolitan Council, where he served as an advisor to the council until his retirement in 2016. Don's behind-the-scenes work and his analysis of legislation had a major influence on much of Nashville's progress during his tenure, including balanced budgets, the comprehensive rezoning of the city, the construction of the downtown library and arena, and bringing the Houston Oilers and professional hockey to Nashville. Don also enjoyed teaching as an adjunct professor at Belmont University and at Nashville School of Law, where he was beloved by his students for his breadth of knowledge, his wit, and his war stories. After retiring from teaching, Don served on the Belmont University Board of Trustees for 6 years. Those who knew Don well knew him to be a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. Don loved and cherished his family, his wife Sue, his daughters Suzanne, Jennifer, and Donna, and his granddaughters and grandsons. Don was also an avid golfer and enjoyed his golf group at Hillwood Country Club, where he twice served as president, and Temple Hills Country Club, where he golfed in his later years. He was also devoted to his church, Emmanuel Baptist Church, where he taught Sunday school and served as chairman of the deacons and church treasurer. Don was my mentor, my friend, and I miss him dearly. Thank you.
The memorial resolution for Leroy Johnston Ellis III will be presented by Johnny Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Thank you, Nashville Bar, and thank you, members of the Davidson County Chancery Court. May it please the court, I move a resolution memorializing the life and practice of Leroy Johnston Ellis III, who was my father. He practiced law here in this town for some 59 years. Lee Ellis, as he was known to his friends, was originally from New York City, but while he was at Sewanee University, he met my mother and became a Nashville man. They moved to New York during his last year at Columbia University Law School, and after a brief term in the Army, they returned to Nashville so that he might practice law with her father, Littell Rust. And from 1953 to 2012, his primary office was here in Davidson County. During that period of time, he was involved with many civic and community-oriented organizations and causes. He was the founding president of the American Civil Liberties Union in 1968. Tennessee's first chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union in this state was focused primarily on civil rights and helping people. That was something he felt strongly about. He was also involved with the Circle Players, which is a local theater group, because he wanted to bring arts and entertainment and culture to the people here of Nashville, and he felt strongly about that. He was the general counsel for the Tennessee Department of Conservation, and although he was not a Republican, he served during the administration of Lamar Alexander and helped to maintain the parks and recreation and improve the environment of the state of Tennessee while he was there as legal counsel. The entire time he was doing this, he was a professor at the Nashville YMCA Night Law School, now known as the Nashville School of Law. He taught there from 1960 until his retirement in 1998, some 38 years, where he taught conflict of laws. And he affected and taught many of some of the most well-known and respected lawyers and judges in this town. I think that I cannot sum up the life of and practice of my father, Lee Ellis, in a 3-minute synopsis. So I encourage you to read the memorial resolution, which is very well written. But I think that if he were to suggest, leave a few words of advice behind, it would be to young lawyers. I think he would say, maintain your reputation and guard it jealously, because that is a lawyer's real stock in trade. And while he loved the law, which he did, he was an avaricious reader and meticulously kept track of new developments. I think he would tell us that when we protect the weak, we protect ourselves at our weakest moments. And when we encourage respect, when we show respect to others, we encourage respect in return. And when we improve the law, we improve the very world that we live in. And these are the lessons from my father as to being a lawyer and the practice of law. I think he wanted to spend time, his 59 years here, trying to improve the law because he really wanted to improve the world we live in. And with that, I respectfully move that this memorial resolution be admitted to the minutes of the Davidson County Chancery Court. Thank you.
The memorial resolution for Judge John Trice Nixon will be presented by Gary Blackburn.
John Nixon, United States District Judge, a proud, courageous Southern champion of civil rights, left this world on December 19, 2019, at the age of 86. He was among those few about whom it can truthfully be said that he made a difference in his eventful life. Judge Nixon was born in New Orleans and grew up near Vanderbilt University, where his father, H.C. Nixon, was a political science professor and a member of the agrarian movement. This may have influenced his lifelong love of Southern literature and his many friendships, including the great Mississippi writer, Eudora Welty. He graduated from the former Peabody Demonstration School, now University School, and lived in that neighborhood for many of his later years. He went to Harvard, to the Army, to the Vanderbilt Law School, where he graduated in the class of 1960 the year John F. Kennedy was elected president. John Nixon practiced law in Anniston, Alabama, near the area of his father's upbringing. As city attorney, he established a biracial commission that came to the attention of Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. In 1964, he prosecuted a local Klan member for the crime of shooting into an African-American church and was hired as a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division of Kennedy's Department of Justice. He returned to Alabama with the authority of the government behind him. Assigned to Selma, he spent his first 6 months working to protect the rights of activists, insisting on the right of Black people to vote. This meant facing those who were alleged to have plotted assassinations, and he encountered once again the man he had prosecuted earlier in Anniston. John was present on Bloody Sunday in March 1965. The events of that day never left his thoughts or failed to motivate his actions. He was present for Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Montgomery and doubtless celebrated the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Judge Nixon served on the General Sessions and Circuit Court bench in Davidson County. After appointment to the federal bench in 1980 by President Jimmy Carter, upon recommendation of Senator Jim Sasser, Judge Nixon took his law clerks with him on annual pilgrimages to Selma and joined in Sunday services at Brown's Chapel. Judge Nixon served as Chief Judge of the Middle District of Tennessee from 1991 to 1998. He was courteous to lawyers and litigants alike, and always sensitive to the need to create a more equitable society within the bounds of the law. He criticized 2 Supreme Court cases that created more stringent pleading requirements as doing nothing to advance the fairness and efficiency of the courts, but he adhered to the precedents. His rulings on prison conditions, health care, and most controversially, the death penalty, drew the ire of politicians who threatened impeachment and used him to criticize the senator who had recommended him many years before. But John Nixon was a courageous man who stayed the course of justice. He enjoyed the ceremony of swearing in new citizens and was known for pointing out that many of the founders had owned slaves. In his later years, he enjoyed trips to New Orleans, Charleston, and Paris, all places of history and fine food. His character was displayed in a comment he made concerning Confederate statues long before the subject had risen to the level of public consciousness we see today. Southerners, he said, are reared to be polite, which includes not being offensive to others. Statues celebrating soldiers who fought to preserve slavery were offensive to Black people and therefore impolite. The proper behavior of a true Southerner, he said, would be to remove them. One of the eloquent descriptions of Senator Robert Kennedy given by his brother in his eulogy are fitting for John Trice Nixon. He need not be idolized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we acknowledge and honor the life and service of Judge John T. Nixon, a lawyer, a judge, and a gentleman. We mourn his passing, but present his life and work as a model for all lawyers and judges who may pass this way after. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the association and entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and copies thereof be furnished to his daughters and the 2nd day of November, 2020.
The memorial resolution for Elizabeth Bingham Marney will be presented by Mary Collier.
Elizabeth Bingham Marney died peacefully and unexpectedly at home on May the 26th of 2020. Betty was a First Amendment scholar, an appellate advocate for the state of Tennessee, an exceptional English teacher, a world traveler, a devoted wife, mother and grandmother, a mentor, a dear friend to many, and a Tar Heel. Betty began her career teaching English, and she continued to do so throughout her legal career, to all lawyers whom she mentored or encountered, and the occasional judge. Betty was born Elizabeth Ann Bingham in Bristol, Tennessee in 1940. She spent her childhood in Bristol and the Panama Canal Zone. After her mother's death, Betty returned to Bristol to live with her grandmother. Betty completed an AA degree at Sullins College and then went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where she earned a BA and an MA in English, graduating summa cum laude, and she was a member of Phi Beta Kappa. After graduating from UNC, she took a teaching position at SMU, and she next attended the University of Texas at Austin, where she earned her PhD. Betty's grandmother set her up on a blind date on one of her trips back to Bristol with a young medical student named Sam Marney. After the first date, Betty's grandmother asked, "Well, what did you two talk about?" Betty said, "Politics." Her grandmother replied, "Betty, you fool." It all worked out well as Betty and Sam celebrated 53 years of marriage last October. As they both had doctorates, many referred to them as Dr. Betty and Dr. Sam. Betty taught English at Harpeth Hall School here in Nashville for 10 years, where she was both inspiring and sometimes terrifying. Her love of English literature was contagious. After leaving Harpeth Hall in 1985, Betty earned a law degree from Vanderbilt University in 1988 at the age of 48. She had come from a line of attorneys, judges, and the occasional criminal, and thrived in her second career as a lawyer. Betty began with First Amendment work at King & Ballou before becoming in-house counsel at the Nashville Banner newspaper, and she was proud to have written the brief and been in attendance for one case before the United States Supreme Court. She completed her legal career working in the Criminal Appellate Division of the Tennessee Attorney General's Office, where friends will not be surprised to learn that she enjoyed being called General. Upon leaving her legal office at the state for the last time, and not being terribly sentimental, she had no desire to hang her law degree on her wall at home, so she put it in a trash can. It was then collected by a colleague who had always wanted a Vanderbilt law degree, and as far as we know, it still hangs on a wall at the Tennessee AG's office. Upon her retirement in 2008, Betty and Sam enjoyed several years of international travel. With the exception of Antarctica, they visited every continent, making friends and building memories. You haven't really seen a picture of Betty until you've seen her riding a camel. After travel was no longer possible, she and Sam enjoyed a quiet routine at home, reading the New York Times daily, staying up to date on current politics, and worrying about the country going to hell in a handbasket. She is survived by her husband, Dr. Samuel Rowe Marney Jr., her son, Samuel Marney III of the Memphis Bar, her daughter, Dr. Annis Morrison Marney, and her husband, Glenn Gustus Dukes Jr. of the Nashville Bar, and 4 grandchildren. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life and work of Dr. General Elizabeth Bingham Marney, PhD and JD. Be it further resolved that may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. Alfred Lloyd Tennyson. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies thereof be furnished to Betty Marney's family. Thank you.
The memorial resolution for Patricia Eags McAnally will be presented by David Young Parker.
May it please the court. On a Friday afternoon, the governor's office called down to the Tennessee Department of Public Welfare and told them a new lawyer would be there on Monday in the make room for her. On Monday morning, Miss Tennessee, that is Pat Eaves, walked in at 8 o'clock. When asked where she parked, she looked out the front window and pointed to a spot right below in the state office building. She had parked her big yellow Cadillac Coupe de Ville in the commissioner's reserved parking place. Her road was not an easy one. The secretaries resented her and made her life miserable because they did not think a woman should practice law, and a lawyer should not be Miss Tennessee, and one told her so to her face. Good-natured Pat tried to ignore it and moved on. She held her ground. She refused to wear the clunky shoes of the day. She maintained her dignity. She was a seasoned politician, a liberal Democrat, and could read people extremely well. In July 1969, she had what we call a 36-108 case set in the Chancery Court in Carthage. She asked me to cover for her that day. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, Chancellor Turner and Jackie Biller whined that they had been waiting all week to see Miss Tennessee. Their demeanor changed and Jackie wore me out. In a case in Knoxville, Judge Douglas was going to return 2 children to their parents. Pat jumped to her feet and said, "Over my dead body." The children did not go back. Being Miss Tennessee, she could get away with things others could not. She had an infectious laugh, and you could hear her all over the office. I left the state in 1971, and she left in 1974. There has only been one Pat Eaves, a great lawyer and a beautiful person.
The memorial resolution for Joseph Brenner Jr. will be presented by Colleen McLean.
I first met Joseph Brenner Jr. when we were newly minted lawyers, and he remained a lifelong friend, and I'm happy to present his memorial today. Joseph Brenner Jr. was born on February 26, 1947 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He died in Nashville of complications from ALS on February 5th, 2020. Joseph graduated from Drew University in 1969 and from Vanderbilt University College of Law in 1972. He began his career in the legal services of the Tennessee General Assembly, and he later served in the Tennessee Department of Mental Health, where he completed over 30 years of outstanding service. He was known and admired by everybody who knew him for his considered, deliberate analysis. He was a champion for the protection of human rights, and he authored numerous mental health and developmental disability statutes. He supported multiple nonprofits whose missions mirrored his regard for people with mental and physical disabilities. Joseph was a founder and board member of the nonprofit trust company, Guardianship and Trust Corporation of Tennessee, and he served on the board of directors of the Continental Condominium. Little known by those who worked with him throughout the years is the fact that Joseph was an accomplished musician, having mastered 3 different instruments in his youth. He was an avid reader, a student of several languages, and he loved to travel, listen to classical music, and prepare gourmet meals for his friends. Joseph left the world a better place than he found it. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life and work of Joseph Brenner Jr. and mourn in his passing the loss of a keen mind, a caring spirit, and a lifelong student of law who sought justice for all and represented the highest aspirations of the law. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the association and entered in the memorandum book, minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee.
The memorial resolution for Thomas Wesley Williams will be presented by Summer Melton.
After 86 long and fulfilled years, Thomas Wesley Williams left this life on December 18, 2019. As a veteran, husband, father, grandfather, an active volunteer in his community, and a lawyer, he is sorely missed by many. Thomas grew up in North Nashville, and he was proud of it. He remained close with the North High School class of 1951 and could be seen proudly wearing his Cobb County hat while telling stories of his high school days. After graduating, Thomas went on to the University of Tennessee. He obtained his college degree, but before heading to law school, Thomas joined the military. Enough cannot be said about his courage and loyalty. Thomas spent 4 years in the military from 1957 to 1961. Thomas's life only continued to flourish. He met his wife, Vera Barrett Williams, and spent 39 years living by her side. He and Vera had 2 children, Thomas Williams III and Pamela Diane Thompson. They also had 5 grandchildren. Thomas joined his son, Thomas III, and his grandson, Shane, in heaven when he passed. Thomas enrolled at Nashville School of Law and obtained his Juris Doctorate. He spent several years of his life practicing real estate law and estate planning in Old Hickory, Tennessee. All the while, he was a 32-degree Mason and member of the Ionic Lodge number 254, through which he gained lifelong friendships and helped to make better men out of good men. Thomas was a believer who attended Temple Baptist Church in Old Hickory. Unlike most lawyers who would prefer to skip a math class, Thomas served as an accountant at the Cumberland Utility District. He also took on a role as the office manager. Thomas retired from the Cumberland Utility District and spent the rest of his days reminiscing with the North High School Class of '51 and the Freemasons. He mentored many young men and young lawyers, helping them truly to become better men. Therefore, be it resolved that we honor the life, work, and legacy of our colleague, Thomas Wesley Williams. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the association and entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies be furnished to his family.
The memorial resolution for Philip Leon Davidson will be presented by John Jablonski.
Philip Leon Davidson died September 19th, 2019, after a courageous battle with cancer. Phil, who was born on January 3rd, 1946, wore many hats during his 73 years. His most recent hat was that of an attorney who had practiced in Davidson County, Tennessee since 1988. Phil was a retired colonel in the Army National Guard who was honored and respected by all those whom he led and served. Phil was committed to helping those around him and was a true and gifted caretaker of all that had been entrusted to him. He served his community well. Everyone who knew Phil knew that he loved all things softball. He was a spectator, coach, and umpire for over 25 years, and he devoted endless time and effort to the sport he loved. He coached the Father Ryan softball team from 2003 to 2010, winning the state championship in 2006. Every girl who knew him and played under his guidance loved him dearly. He cared deeply for each and every young lady he coached. In his spare time, Phil loved to travel, and he spent continuous weeks traveling the world with his wife, Karen, the true love of his life. He was there for anything and everything his daughters pursued, and he supported them totally. He stood by them with unwavering support and was the best father his daughters could have desired. He spent every possible moment with his 4 grandchildren, and they looked up to their colonel with complete adoration. In 1988, Phil started his own law practice, which was his most recent and his primary career for over 30 years. Phil always practiced as a sole practitioner during his legal career. If a person needed help, it did not matter what kind of problem it was. He was a zealous advocate for each and every one of his clients. His devotion to his clients was unparalleled, as was his work ethic. Wherever he saw need, he addressed it. Phil left his Nashville community and the entire state of Tennessee a better place for all of us to live. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life and work of Philip Leon Davidson and mourn in his passing the loss of a razor-sharp mind and a caring person who during his life helped and sought justice for all. He most assuredly represented the highest aspirations of the law. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the Nashville Bar Association and be entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies be furnished to members of his family, his wife Karen, and his daughters Allison, Brooke, and Carrie.
The memorial resolution for Donald D. Hildebrand will be presented by Charlie Newall.
This is my memorial resolution for Donald Dean Hildebrand. Nashville attorney Donald Hildebrand passed on April 14, 2020 in Nashville, Tennessee at the age of 91. Don was born in Emden, Illinois on August 9, 1928 to Ethel Pauline Weimer Hildebrand and Henry John Hildebrand. After attending public schools in Emden, Don graduated with a BA in liberal arts from Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington, Illinois in 1950. Don began law school at Vanderbilt University, and after his second year, he entered the U.S. Army during the Korean War. Don served in the General Corps, and after an honorable discharge, he returned to Vanderbilt Law School, where he graduated in 1955. Don was employed by State Farm Insurance Company initially, and then several years after, in 1964, he was the founder of the law firm Lester, Hildebrand, Nolan, Porter, and Mondelli. Don was recognized as a man of many talents and interests. In 1972, he served on the state commander of the Tennessee American Legion, and during that year, he also had one of the first talk shows on WLAC called Conservative Viewpoint. In 1973, he was the Republican candidate for the Tennessee Supreme Court. As a member of the Eisenhower Foundation People to People program, Don traveled to Russia, South Africa, China, Vietnam, Egypt, and other countries on their mission. He also traveled to over 100 countries and has been to all continents, including Antarctica. Don was a lifetime lover of music and organized the Nashville Lawyers Orchestra, as well as another local orchestra known as the Established. He played multiple instruments, but his greatest love and talent was the saxophone. Don was survived by his wife, Lady Grace Sandifer, and stepdaughter, Melissa Hamilton, and two brothers, Robert L. Hildebrand of Glen Ellen, Illinois, and Larry D. Hildebrand of Morton, Illinois. Don was preceded in death by his first wife, Jewel Hildebrand, his wife for over 49 years. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the memory of Donald Dean Hildebrand be preserved by this resolution, that it be spread upon the minutes of the Chancery Court for Davidson County, and that copies hereof be furnished to his family. Respectfully submitted, Charlie Newald.
The memorial resolution for Richard Denmar Byrd will be presented by Scott Carey.
Richard Denmar Byrd, 86, a prominent Nashville attorney for almost 60 years, died June 30th, 2020, with his wife and children at his bedside. Richard was born August 13th, 1933, to Julius Broyles and Hannie Mae Byrd in Bristol, Virginia, and grew up in Bristol, Tennessee. He is survived by his wife, Cherry, children Richard Byrd Jr. and Sally Einstman, stepchildren Keith Grisham and Ashley Barbeau, and his grandchildren, Andrew and Palmer Eitzman and Ainsley and Jack Barbeau. He was predeceased by his parents and his first wife, Celia Fite Byrd. He moved to Nashville to attend Vanderbilt University and was referred to as a double door, earning his bachelor's degree in 1954 and his JD in 1959. His college days were highlighted by his exceptional camaraderie with his Sigma Chi fraternity brothers. After college, they remained in touch, traveled together, and still shared lunch every month. He received his license to practice law in March of 1959 and later joined the American Bar Association and was elected a fellow in the Tennessee Bar Foundation. He served as president of the Nashville Bar in 1979. He became associated with an outstanding law firm and eventually was named partner in that firm known as Gracie, Madden, Cowan, and Byrd. During these early years of his practice, the Nashville Bar was smaller and perhaps more collegial and close-knit, and a young lawyer like Richard Byrd handled all types of cases. In an era before the law became so highly specialized, Mr. Byrd drafted wills, gave tax advice, became an outstanding corporate and business lawyer, and even tried jury trials. And as he would love to tell the young litigators in the office, he even tried criminal jury trials. He was already a prominent lawyer in his early 50s when a law firm from Memphis approached him about opening a Nashville branch. Louis Donaldson had been looking for the right lawyer to start the Nashville office, and Richard Byrd was the first. Thereupon, in 1987, Richard joined High School Donaldson to open its Nashville office, which later merged with Baker Worthington to become the firm of Baker Donaldson, where he remained until his retirement in 2016. The poet Maya Angelou said, "People will forget what you said, and people will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way you made them feel." Mr. Byrd was generous with his time and made people feel special. He could talk to anyone, people from all walks of life. Baker Donaldson has an awards program each year, and one of those awards is named the Richard D. Mentor of the Year Award. This award recognizes a shareholder who supports the growth and learning of younger attorneys. And certainly Richard Byrd did just that. So many who practiced with him are better lawyers because of him. He achieved a level of excellence as a lawyer that every lawyer should strive for. He also mentored secretaries, paralegals, and runners. He taught not only the specifics of the job, but also how to get along with all, deal with issues, and the value of taking an interest in everyone and doing the best job possible. When you work with someone you truly respect, you want to go that extra mile. Everyone who worked with him wanted to do their best for Mr. Byrd. One trait in particular stands out about Richard Byrd when it comes to practicing law: civility. The legal profession can sometimes be harsh and even nasty. Mr. Byrd stood out for his unwavering and constant commitment to treating others as they would want to be treated. Beyond being a lawyer's lawyer, Mr. Byrd was the true definition of a gentleman. One of his law partners at his retirement said, "Richard made all his friends clients, and all his clients became his friends." Lifelong friends, lifelong clients. That's what made Richard Byrd prominent. He truly cared about all the people in his work life, personal life, and the many who crossed the lines into both. Richard Byrd was an outstanding attorney and a true Southern gentleman. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life and work of Richard D. Byrd and mourn his passing. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the association and entered in the Memoriam Minute Book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee. Entered November 19th, 2020.
The memorial resolution for James Charles Edwards will be presented by Ralph DeMarco.
This is the memorial resolution for James Charles Edwards. James Charles Jim Edwards was born on November 6, 1949, the only child of Cola C. Edwards and Inez Brewer Edwards. He was born and reared in Old Hickory, Tennessee. He graduated from David Lipscomb College and the Nashville School of Law. He was a lifelong member of Madison Church of Christ. He answered Uncle Sam's call and joined the U.S. Navy, serving 2 years of active duty in England and was honorably discharged. Upon returning home to Nashville, Jim needed a job and was fortunate enough to be hired by George Rucker, and he began employment in the Civil Division of General Sessions Court while attending the Nashville School of Law. Jim thoroughly enjoyed those years in meeting various people. Jim's parents were very doting, and he was a very happy and outgoing child. He never met a stranger. And as an only child, he was basically the center of attention all of his life. Growing up, he was surrounded by dogs of various breeds and also horses and various farm animals. Jim had a love of firearms, and he received his first shotgun at age 4. As he grew older, he collected various guns, and that was something he really treasured. He also acquired numerous horses and dogs. Jim enjoyed fishing with his mom and dad, but he mostly enjoyed hunting and horseback riding. He would often load a couple of horses in his trailer and drive to various locations and partake of trail rides and enjoy barrel racing events while camping out. He really loved the outdoors. He especially loved trips out west, so much so at one point he contemplated moving to Wyoming or Montana. He enjoyed roughing it like the cowboys of olden days. One year, he went out west with another attorney on a hunting trip. They hired a guide to help them find big game. They flipped a coin and Jim won the right to take the first shot in the event they found any. Well, as luck would have it, Jim and the other attorney spotted a large elk. Jim proceeded to make detailed calculations as to distance, wind speed, gun velocity, etc. He took so long in his calculations that the other attorney grew frustrated, picked up his gun and took the shot and killed the elk, much to Jim's dismay. After the death of Jim's father, Jim moved back home to live with his mother. She was nearing retirement age, and he hired her at that time to work in his law office. She was still young enough to be of great support, and she worked for Jim for nearly 20 years. She was the hostess at Jim's Christmas parties and would have hosting his clients and courthouse personnel. They worked well together and even talked about going to Canada for a fishing trip. They went to the campsite in a seaplane and then fishing craft to access the remote campsite. She undertook this challenge and even caught more fish than Jim. Unfortunately, Jim's mother's health declined and he was her caretaker and kept his law practice going. His mom died in 2009. Jim always wanted the last word. He hated to lose an argument. Jim's law practice focused on debt collection. He loved getting clients' money back for them. He also did some family law, but preferred collecting bad debts. Jim's office was located in Madison, Tennessee for the majority of his practice, but he moved to Rivergate in 2015. Jim died on January 31st, 2019 at the age of 69. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life, the work, and the spirit of James Charles Edwards and mourn his passing and the loss of an outstanding colleague. Be it further resolved that his memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the association and entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies thereof be furnished to members of his family.
The memorial resolution for William Henry Hale II will be presented by Bill Koch.
For centuries, the chapel bell at Lincoln's Inn in London has rung whenever a member of the inn dies. In 1624, John Donne memorialized his custom in Meditation 17 when he wrote, "Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." On Wednesday, February 19th, 2020, the bell tolled for our friend and colleague, William Henry Hale II. It calls on us to mourn his passing, to celebrate his interesting and multifaceted life, and to remember that in due time, the bell will toll for each of us. Henry was born on September 22nd, 1943 in Nashville, Tennessee, the son of Dr. Kenneth Hale Sr. and Mary Josephine Griffin Hale. He spent most of his early years in Cookeville, Tennessee, with his three brothers and his sister. He graduated from high school in 1961 and earned his baccalaureate degree from Tennessee Tech in 1965. After graduating from Tennessee Tech, Henry headed to Washington, D.C. He worked as a mathematician for the Department of the Navy from 1965 to 1967. Then he was employed as a systems analyst, first by ACT Corp and later by the Securities and Exchange Commission. In 1970, Henry became a special assistant to United States Senator Albert Gore Sr. He also worked briefly as the assistant director for the Association of American Publishers. In addition to his day jobs, Henry enrolled in Georgetown Law School's part-time program and received his JD degree in 1971. Henry returned to Tennessee that same year after he accepted an offer from David M. Pack, Tennessee's Attorney General and reporter, to become an assistant attorney general. He joined a band of young knights errant housed in the attic of the Supreme Court building. The group's youthful self-confidence and lack of close supervision led to a challenging, stimulating, and occasionally chaotic work environment. In short order, Henry established himself as an excellent trial and appellate litigator. He was thoroughly prepared, he had a commanding courtroom presence, and he was fearless. He thrived on the give and take not only with other attorneys, but also with the judges. Few litigators enjoyed their time in court more than Henry. But whether in court or not, Henry loved to argue. He argued every day, if not for business, then for recreation. Henry could argue both sides of any subject, and those close to him miss his vigor, his directness, and the simple fun of arguing with him. Wherever he is today, there is no doubt that Henry is enjoying a good argument, probably with Alex Shipley. The Attorney General represents the state in all proceedings in federal court. In the mid-1970s, Chief Justice Harry Phillips of the Sixth Circuit, himself an alumnus of the Attorney General's office, informed General Pack that he and his colleagues were concerned about the quality of Tennessee's representation before the Sixth Circuit. In response, General Pack removed the attorney who had been doing the work and designated Henry as the lead attorney in all cases in federal court. Henry enjoyed this work immensely and even developed a professional rapport with many of Tennessee's federal judges. Henry's relationship with Judge L. Morton was particularly noteworthy, especially after Judge Morton began holding court in Cookeville. One of Henry's clients filed a civil rights action seeking damages for a beating by a member of the South Carthage Police Department. After Henry described in profane, colorful language just what the officer had beaten out of his client, Judge Morton banged his gavel and said, "That'll be $100, Mr. Hale." Once the contempt citation was reduced to an order, Henry framed a copy of the order and hung it in his office. Henry reveled in handling big cases, and he handled a good number of them. One series of cases involved Governor Winfield Dunn's decision to build a prison in Morristown, Tennessee. That decision was not well received by Morristown's mayor and other city residents, who eventually filed lawsuits in state and federal court to stop the construction. Henry represented the state in all these proceedings and spent a great deal of time on the construction site where the mayor and the townspeople had set up a roadblock. The mayor took a personal dislike to Henry, and the feeling was mutual. Even though Henry was prevailing in court, the political heat eventually forced Governor Dunn to abandon the project, much to Henry's disappointment. Henry then advised the project's contractor to sue the mayor for conspiracy to deprive him of an opportunity to complete his contract. In response to the contractor's lawsuit, the mayor filed his own lawsuit against the contractor for malicious prosecution. The courts eventually dismissed the mayor's malicious prosecution suit because the contractor had been acting on Henry's advice. Another case involved the firing of an assistant mathematics professor at Tennessee State. The professor filed pro se complaints in federal and state court seeking damages and reinstatement. Henry represented the defendants. After the federal judge dismissed the professor's complaint, the case proceeded in state court. There was no love lost between the professor and Henry. And even though the professor ultimately prevailed on his back pay claim, he filed a pro se complaint in state court seeking Henry's disbarment. Henry was ably represented by John Buffalo and eventually prevailed with his law license intact. Another case widely reported in the local and national news media involved a lawsuit Henry filed to oust Smyrna's longtime mayor. After the jury found the mayor guilty of various conflicts of interest, the trial judge removed him from office, and on that very same day, the mayor's twin brother, in his role as city coordinator, fired Henry's client. Henry filed suit in federal court against the former mayor and his brother, and a jury eventually awarded his client $345,000 in damages. The ousted mayor was twice reelected during a lengthy appeals process. However, the mayor eventually resigned from office shortly after the Tennessee Supreme Court upheld the ouster decision. Henry's most notable case involved James Earl Ray, the murderer of the Reverend Martin Luther King. Following the entry of his guilty plea, Ray filed a habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court in Nashville, challenging his plea and asserting his innocence. Henry was assigned to the case and represented the state as the case bounced back between the District Court, the Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. Henry eventually led the trial team that proved that Ray had indeed killed Dr. King, and Ray's petition for writ of habeas corpus was denied. After Time magazine published an article about him in January 1976, Ray sued the magazine as well as Henry. He alleged that Henry, as the state's chief counsel, had libeled him and violated his civil rights. On this occasion, Henry was represented by Henry A. Martin. The district court dismissed Ray's claims on the ground that the confessed assassin of Dr. King had no character that could be impugned. Later, Ray's brother, Jerry Ray, also sued Henry for libel, and that case was ultimately dismissed for failure to prosecute. Henry's practice spanned a wide range of civil and criminal cases in state court. He played a role in the UT Nashville TSU merger. He played a role in the Nashville school busing cases. He left the office of the Attorney General in 1976, in part because of his candid comments regarding a state trial court decision requiring the reinstatement of prison counselors who Henry believed had been dishonest. He partnered briefly with Bart Durham, who had been a colleague in the Attorney General's office. Later in 1976, he formed a partnership with Henry A. Martin. In 1982, Henry opened up the Nashville office for Morton Lewis, King and Craig, and after practicing a few years with the firm, went solo for the rest of his career. Public policy and politics were among Henry's interests from an early age. While many of his views moderated over time, Henry tended to be left of center. When Clifford Allen died unexpectedly in June 1978, Henry entered the race to succeed him as an independent, squaring off against Democrat Bill Boner and Republican Bill Goodwin. Even though Henry came in third, he did surprisingly well for a first-time candidate with little name recognition. French was Henry's second language. To smooth over his Cookville accent, he hired a private tutor and joined Alliance Francaise in Nashville. He traveled often to France, Morocco, Corsica, and when he was not practicing his French, he traveled to Asia, South America, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and most European countries. His love for travel never ceased, and he spent his last summer in Colmar in northeastern France, enjoying all things French and watching the Tour de France with his family. Henry had a succession of serious illnesses in the later chapters of his life. He faced them head on and generally with success. His friends and family admired his resilience and steely will not to let each diagnosis slow him down or prevent him from enjoying life. The Parkinson's diagnosis was tough, but he held it at bay with determination. Finally, his Parkinson's and a dissected aorta proved too much. Henry is survived by his wife, Betty Osborne Wiley. Ever since their marriage in 2000, Betty has been the wind that kept Henry's sails full. He was at his happiest and best when he was with her. He is also survived by his three children, Ella Hale Dunn, Porter and Henry Hale, a son-in-law, Jeff Dunn, and three grandchildren, Carly Dunn, and Eden and Griffin Hale, and by his brothers, Dr. Kenneth Hale, John G. Hale, and James J. Hale, and his sister, Sarah Hale Deppen. Death has now done all it can do. Henry's work on earth is done, and he has joined the blessed company of the saints. We are left with memories and with the inspiration that will be his legacies for many years to come. And we look forward to that fine day when we will be united with him again. Therefore, be it resolved that we, the members of the Nashville Bar Association, solemnly express our profound appreciation and gratitude for the life and work of Henry Hale. We recognize and honor his contributions to his family, his friends, the state, and the nation, and we mourn his death. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the Nashville Bar Association and entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court for Davidson County, and that copies of this resolution be furnished to the members of his family. Respectfully submitted by William C. Koch Jr., the Honorable Walter C. Kurtz, Henry A. Martin, James A. O'Hara, and Michael E. Terry.
The memorial resolution for Davis Buster Whitfield Atkinson Jr. will be presented by Mitch Grissom.
This is the memorial resolution for Davis Buster Whitfield Atkinson Jr. Buster Atkinson was a remarkable, devoted friend, mentor, and advocate. During his life, he touched the hearts of many with the enthusiasm and generosity and love for justice and equality. His joyous spirit and vast knowledge made him a valued problem solver and co-worker. Born to Davis and Lucia Atkinson in February of 1949, Buster grew up in the Green Hills area. He married his high school sweetheart, Pam Frazier, and the two remained married for 48 years. They were blessed with two children, Davis Chip Atkinson III and their daughter, Whitney Atkinson. Tragically, they lost their son to multiple sclerosis at the age of 15, and a scholarship was funded in his name at St. Paul Christian Academy. He loved his daughter dearly and supported her in her education and her career choices, and was privileged to be able to work alongside her during his legal career. He took great pride in Whitney's successes and was always there to offer guidance. Buster was a loving husband and supportive father. Buster began his working career at Nashville. Buster began his working career at First American Bank Management Program. While there, he earned a master's in business administration at Belmont University and a master's in psychology at Middle Tennessee State University. He later served as vice president of Nashville Gas Company before retiring in 1997 with 20 years of service. While working at Nashville Gas Company, he obtained a law degree from the Nashville School of Law in 1981. After retiring the gas company, Buster immediately went into private practice at Mitch Grissom & Associates, where he practiced law until he retired in December of 2018 after 21 years. During his practice of law, Buster worked primarily with automobile accident, workers' comp, and personal injury cases. He developed a special passion for helping injured workers with their compensation claims. Buster yearned to develop long-lasting and trusting relationships with all that he met. He could find a mutual connection with almost anyone. He had deep Nashville roots and loved the people here. He had the ability to befriend almost everyone with whom he spoke. Buster was admired for his love of animals and his charitable heart. He served on the board of Paul's and made donations frequently to the Nashville Zoo at Grassmere and many other causes. He could often be found visiting the zoo. Wherever he went, he took with him his zest for life and his dry, witty sarcasm. Buster was humble and generous as an employee and co-worker. He never wanted a private office. He preferred to work in a cubicle alongside his team. He felt an occasional working lunch to help with team morale and enjoyed sitting together in such atmosphere to discuss cases and to brainstorm. As a manager, he was never hesitant to give praise for a job well done and truly understood the term teamwork, making everyone feel important and needed. Buster was always available to offer advice or help with a legal question, often drawing a picture or using colored markers to help with the understanding. After retiring from Mitch Grissom & Associates, he continued to offer pro bono help from his home to injured workers, aiding them in navigating the Tennessee Department of Labor workers' compensation process. Buster was a true friend and a pillar in his community. His work impacted many, and his legacy lives on. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the memory of Davis Buster Whitfield Atkinson be preserved by this resolution, and that it be spread upon the minutes of the Chancery Court for Davidson County, and that copies thereof be furnished to his family. Thank you.
The memorial resolution for Robert Mansell Moses will be presented by Marlene Eskin Moses.
May it please the court. I am Marlene Eskin Moses of the Nashville Bar, and I am here to present the memorial resolution for Robert Mansell Moses, my husband. Robert Mansell Moses was the love of my life. I was fortunate that he chose me as his wife. We were together for 50 years and married for 47. For most of the time, it was like pure heaven. He was kind, sensitive, generous, and wanting to please. Being with him created complete comfort and ease. He was my biggest cheerleader and always supportive. He encouraged me to live life to the fullest and was there to give. His unconditional love, at times I needed it the most. About me and what I did, he would often boast. I was not the only one who received his praise. So did our 3 children, whom he competently raised. He was a most dedicated and devoted dad. He did all that he could and gave all that he had. If mom said no, the children went to their father. They knew with him they could get much further. He was a talented musician and played the piano. He ran a recording studio. Until graduate school he would go. He graduated from Vanderbilt University with an engineering degree, but more school was in his future. A longtime student he would be. He went to Tulane University for a master's in business administration degree, which he received while living in New Orleans, much to his glee. He built a wholesale wine, liquor, and beer distributorship that has grown with full state coverage, which has become very well known. He thought with any more school that he was surely through, but I decided I wanted to go to law school and asked him to come too. To YMCA Night Law School, we would go together. We would together go. He paid the tuition month to month so he could say no. More studying and to class he mostly went. Admittedly, it was not his most favorite event. He did enjoy his classmates and the education he received. He hung in to graduate, passed the bar, and then he was relieved. He was a long-term member of the Nashville Bar Association. For many years, he was chair of membership services, which planned the fun. Bob was active and involved in his community and beyond. He was passionate about his causes and was very fond of giving back to the community in so many ways. I will name some of his activities for which he spent many days. He was a Mason, a Shriner, and a member of Nashville Rotary. He was president of the board of directors of Harding Academy. He was president of the Nashville branch of the American Jewish Committee. He was president of Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association of Tennessee. A board member of both the Weston Synagogue and the Temple, he worked hard for the well-being of many people. A member of the Board of Zoning Appeals of Belle Meade, you could count on him to take the lead. A member of the Keynote Board of Vanderbilt University, and also a member of the Democratic Executive Committee. A member of the President's Council of Tulane University, he was very active in his life, as is plain to see. Bob's love of life was a true gift to all who knew him, whether large or small. He loved his family, his children, and his 6 grandchildren as well. To them, Grandpa B. Bob was awesome and swell. A loyal friend who spread compassion around. A stranger to him could not be found. I miss you, dear Bob, and along with many others always will. You remain in my heart, filled with love for you still. Thank you for preparing me to live without you. Rest in peace knowing you gave your all through and through. Thanks to the NBA for giving me the opportunity to share, and to all who listened, please know how much I care. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life, legacy, and work of Robert Mansell Moses and mourn in his passing the loss of a dedicated community servant, accomplished businessman, loyal friend, and beloved family member. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies therefore be furnished to members of his family, including his daughters, Marissa Moses Russ and Caroline Moses Sprouse, and to his son, Ryan Manuel Moses, this 19th day of November, 2020.
The memorial resolution for Paul Johnstone Morrow Jr. will be presented by John Pellegrin.
Paul Johnston Morrow Jr. died in Nashville, Tennessee on November 11, 2019 at age 70 of complications from polio that he contracted as a young child. Paul was the youngest child of Paul Morrow Sr. and Lois Barnhart Morrow. When Paul was 3 years old, he became ill and spent much of his third year in the hospital confined to an iron lung. Despite crippling consequences from the disease, the Morrows determined that Paul would have a normal childhood. He played sports, played drums in a band, drove a car, and he completed rigorous education. Their foresight was rewarded by being able to see their baby boy become a thoughtful, self-sufficient warrior possessed of great skills and work ethic. Paul graduated from Washington Lee University in 1971, majoring in English. He graduated from the University of Alabama Law School in 1974. After law school, Paul moved to Nashville to pursue the music business. To finance his quest, he found employment as a law clerk in the office of the State Attorney General. Paul was assigned to work with then Assistant State Attorney General David Rabin. Paul first began by organizing the law library, and then later, on his own initiative, he created a brief bank for the office years before we had computers. Later, Paul helped edit The Abstract, the first magazine with a summary of recent unpublished opinions. David remembers that Paul was an energetic self-starter who was devoted to understanding the rule of law. After 3 years at the Attorney General's office, Paul sat for the bar examination and was licensed in 1977 by the Tennessee Supreme Court. He was promoted as an Assistant State Attorney General in the Criminal Law Division. Paul left the Attorney General's office in 1971 and entered private practice with Ted Walker and Keith Hope. Paul found his life's calling later when he was hired at the new Capital Case Resource Center. Bill Reddick, the managing attorney for the center, made Paul his first attorney hire. The Capital Case Resource Center began as a consulting agency for attorneys defending the death penalty cases in Tennessee, and it quickly evolved into an agency handling state court appeals of death penalty cases. Paul regularly traveled to Knoxville, Jackson, and Memphis on cases and to the state penitentiary to visit clients. His mobility decreased from walking with a cane to a wheelchair and later to a powered cart, but he was undeterred. Paul's legal writing and research skills gave hope to condemned men and women, and there were successes in their cases. In 1995, the CCRC was replaced by the Office of the Post-Conviction Defender, and its director, Don Dawson, recruited Paul as his assistant, where Paul continued to work until his retirement. Paul had an active life outside of work, especially in the music field. He listened to and collected thousands of recordings of all types of music. He studied jazz, rock, Brazilian, and Cajun music. He traveled annually to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in New Orleans as long as his health allowed. A related passion of Paul's was quality beer. He frequented upscale beer halls. He eschewed domestic light beers like the plague. A nightclub with live music and fine beer was the place Paul could often be found. He was a founder of the Elliston Place Literary Society, which began and ended at the Gold Rush restaurant in Midtown. The manager of the Gold Rush had a wheelchair ramp built and installed so Paul could drive his powered chair to his usual table reserved every Friday. Paul was survived by his sister, Lynn Ward, niece, Courtney Chavez, nephews, David Ward and Patrick Knowles, and great nieces, Molly and Maggie Ward. Along with his parents, Paul was preceded in death by his sister, Jane Knowles. Therefore, be it resolved by the Nashville Bar Association that we honor the life and work of Paul J. Morrow Jr. and mourn the loss of a gentleman lawyer. Be it further resolved that this memorial resolution be placed in the permanent records of the Nashville Bar Association and entered in the in memoriam minute book of the Chancery Court of Davidson County, Tennessee, and that copies be furnished to members of Mr. Morrow's family. This resolution is hereby granted and ordered this the 19th day of November, 2020.
The motions for the resolutions are granted, and the memorials shall be spread upon the minutes of the Chancery Court of Davidson County and should be placed in the memoriam records maintained by the Nashville Bar Association. That concludes our proceedings.
This memorial service of the Nashville Bar Association is now adjourned.